and welcome back to the channel. I'm Judy and I have a passion for travel, history, geography, and exploring how these elements shape people's lives. Today we're going to meet the last Duchess of Brittany, Anne de Bretagne. She lived during a fascinating period that marked the transition from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance. Born in 1477 and passing away in 1514, Anne's life and reign as Duchess unfolded during a time when the Renaissance began to influence art, culture, and politics across Europe, especially in France. In her time, most noble women were perceived mostly as baby incubators and trade goods on the international market, but she was far more. A duchess fighting to preserve her inheritance, a shrewd woman who did everything in her power to preserve the independence of her duchy, and a deal maker who always made the best of some pretty terrible bargains. This was a dangerous time for the duchy. The French Valois family in Paris planned to absorb all of the independent duchies into the Kingdom of France. The duchies took issue with this and fought back. There was plenty of squabbling and some outright military fighting going on. The music you hear in the background was contemporary to the time and had a somewhat martial tone, reflecting the conflicts and competing standards of the time. So let's meet this remarkable woman and discover what made her tick. Join me, the armchair traveler, as your guide today. Anne's father, Francois II, lived in turbulent times that demanded not only offensive and diplomatic maneuvering, but having a strong defensive foundation. The Duchy of Brittany was under constant threat. The French crown, particularly under Louis XI, sought to annex Brittany into France. Additionally, the House of Plantagenet had interests in the region during the War of the Roses, creating further complications. To make things worse, Francois had to navigate divisions among the Breton nobility, with some factions supporting the French monarchy's views. The ducal castle in Nantes served as their stronghold. This urban fortress was constructed to defend the independence of the duchy and to safeguard the family, which was increasingly threatened by the Kingdom of France. For a more in-depth exploration, you can check out my walking tour of Nantes. Just look for the link in the description box below. The original ducal castle dated back to the 13th century and was built on top of a Gallo-Roman city wall. However, that structure was demolished in the 15th century to make way for the castle we see today. The chateau of the Dukes of Brittany was part of a series of royal buildings that stretched eastward along the Loire River. The medieval builders always sought to create defensible strongholds, and they often reused and recycled Roman sites. Those Romans knew how to choose the best, most defensible locations and built their work to last. There was a moat, drawbridges, portcullises, towers, arrow slits. All of these were for defense. From the outside, the castle appears quite plain, almost austere, and features a sentry walk that stretches 500 yards along the walls, punctuated by 7 towers. While it was a formidable stronghold, Francois knew he needed more than just defenses to secure his duchy. He needed an heir. Francois and his daughter were power players during the Middle Ages and early Renaissance. He was a member of the House of Montfort, and his family history was quite complicated and tumultuous. He ascended to the dukedom after his predecessor died without a male heir, and ruled from 1450 until his own death in 1488. His reign was characterized by ongoing conflicts with the French crown as Brittany sought to maintain its independence and autonomy. Ultimately, Francois was most focused on preserving the integrity and independence of his dukedom from French influence. To do this, he needed a son. Francois married twice. His first marriage did not produce any children, but his second, to Margaret of Foix, resulted in 2 daughters, Anne of Brittany and Isabel of Brittany. It's likely that Francois was hoping for a son, either with Margaret or perhaps with a replacement in a third marriage. Those hopes were dashed when he fell off his horse at the age of 38. Like any noble family, he had already made plans for his daughters, although it's unclear the extent to which those plans included one of them inheriting the realm. Still, he took steps to prepare for the possibility that having a son might not work out. The absence of a male heir posed significant challenges to medieval rulers. The Salic law, which originated with the Salian Franks, influenced succession and inheritance patterns in medieval Brittany by excluding women from the throne. Under this law, property and titles were passed down to the male heirs, meaning that the daughters could not inherit either one, thereby ensuring that the royal lineage remained strictly patrilineal. Francois had to navigate around this law, at least temporarily, or so he thought. He named Anne as his successor in a way that emphasized her role as a ruler rather than an inheritor of property, possibly imagining that he'd have the opportunity to change all this when a son and heir apparent appeared. The Breton nobility were willing to go along with this arrangement, reasoning that it was better to have a duchess than to risk losing Brittany's status as an independent duchy. Anne was only 11 years old when her father fell off his horse. On his deathbed, he made her promise to do whatever it would take to protect the independence of the duchy. Little Anne took that message to heart. Duchesses, like princesses and queens, were mostly seen as political assets in the medieval realms of Europe. Anne was viewed as a tool of paternal politics. Her father investigated at least half a dozen potential marriages for her, including one to a young Henry VIII, which she fortunately escaped. But this was only for her as a placeholder until a male heir could be secured. That male heir might not have been one of Francois's sons. It could have been one of Anne's. Her personal opinion, desire, or compatibility didn't factor into any of these potential arrangements. Without a male heir, her possessions, including the duchy, would become property of whoever she married, making it crucial for her to maintain control over them. Anne was said to be highly intelligent and dedicated much of her time to the administration of the duchy. She was described as shrewd and proud, and took her promise to protect the duchy very seriously, although that goal ultimately failed after her death. In addition to her political acumen, Anne was a patron of the art and had a deep appreciation for art and music. She amassed a significant collection of tapestries. Interestingly, James Rorimer, who was one of the famous World War II monuments men we met earlier, the link is in the description box, speculated in 1942 that some of these tapestries were probably commissioned by Anne to commemorate her marriage to Louis XII in 1499. Although whether the lady depicted with the crown shown here was indeed Anne will forever remain a mystery. Anne also owned books, including one called The Grand Hours of Anne of Brittany, which she commissioned around 1503, shortly after her marriage to Louis. The manuscript features intricate illustrations, bright colors, personalized elements, including her coat of arms. It has prayers and devotions to reflect the religious practices of the time, and highlighted the importance of personal devotion among the nobility. The masterpiece not only showcased the artistic achievements of what is now the French Renaissance era, but serves as a historical document to show us her influence and her role in the cultural landscape. Anne must have received a comprehensive education and was said to be fluent in French, Breton, and Latin, as well as well-versed in literature, history, and politics, and that would prepare her for significant roles in governance and diplomacy. She was also musically talented, apparently playing the harp. In 16th century France, the ideal of female beauty included a pale complexion, which signified nobility and wealth, and the fact that the person didn't have to work outside, and a fuller figure, which symbolized health and fertility. Long flowing hair was highly valued, often styled elaborately, while symmetrical features and well-proportioned bodies were idealized in art. Description of Anne's physical appearance vary and are quite limited. Contemporary accounts emphasized her character and her intelligence over looks. Anne was noted for her dignified presence, with some sources suggesting that she may have had a fair complexion and attractive features. I mentioned earlier that Francois had been looking into numerous possibilities for marriages for Anne. When Francois died, Brittany was plunged into a fresh crisis. On his deathbed, the Duke made his daughter promise to never consent to the subjugation of the duchy to the Kingdom of France. Anne and the duchy's ticket to continued survival lay in an alliance, which meant marriage. Despite dissension among her advisors over the issue of her marriage, Anne was crowned Duchess of Brittany in Rennes in 1489. The next year, she was married by proxy to Maximilian I of Austria at Rennes Cathedral. That conferred upon her the title Queen of the Romans. The French were outraged. Maximilian was a Habsburg and a deadly enemy of the Valois family in Paris. The proxy marriage violated various agreements that had been made with France, giving the French crown justification to invade Brittany swiftly. Maximilian did not come to Anne's aid because he was preoccupied with conflicts in the Low Countries, and the Holy Roman Empire didn't have the military resources and naval power to reach Brittany and had no strong allies willing to help him. Anne was thus forced to marry Charles VIII of France in 1491, annulling her proxy marriage to Maximilian. This effectively ended Brittany's independence, eventually leading to its full union with France. Anne's first marriage to Maximilian wasn't annulled for another 2 years, but that was a mere formality. With his marriage to Anne, Charles became the administrator of Brittany, establishing a personal union that helped France avoid being completely encircled by the Habsburg territories. Charles's reign only lasted for about 4 more years, with Anne of Brittany as his queen. Anne understood her primary obligation, not just to bear children, but to produce a living male heir. Unfortunately, all of Charles VIII's children with Anne of Brittany died in infancy. This wasn't that uncommon at the time, and the king and the queen were still quite young. Charles VIII died in 1498, aged 27, reportedly after accidentally knocking his head on a door lintel. I have doubts. When we visit Amboise, I'll show you the spot and share the story so you can form your own opinion. Charles died without a male heir, so the rush was on to find a replacement. The nearest surviving relative in the line of succession turned out to be Louis d'Orléans. Louis XII of France, also known as Louis the Father of the People, was king of France from 1498 until his own death in 1515. He was a member of the Valois dynasty and became Anne's third husband. But this is a messy story, so buckle up. Louis started off as Louis d'Orléans, born at the Château de Blois in 1462. His father was almost 70 years old when Louis was born, proving that the man never gave up hope. The fact that Papa was that old would later give Louis notions that probably contributed to his own death. I doubt that anyone seriously considered that this Louis, a minor noble at best, would ever in a sane world become king, but this wasn't a particularly sane or rational world. The king at the time, Louis XI, had a white-hot grudge against the Orleans branch of the family, and saw it as a plausible threat to his own lineage. He took steps to put a stop to it and them. In 1473, Louis XI married off his daughter Joan to the young Louis II, Duke d'Orléans, who would become Louis XII of France. This marriage was arranged because Joan, due to some physical malformation, was expected to be sterile. By doing so, Louis hoped to extinguish the Orleans branch of the House of Valois. Louis died in 1483 and was succeeded by his son, Charles VIII. All was going according to plan. Louis d'Orléans was still stuck in a childless marriage and without much in the way of great future prospects, if you want my opinion. Charles, on the other hand, was young, healthy, and unmarried. You'll recall he had rushed into Brittany and captured and married Anne, who had technically still been married to Maximilian, but that was just a formality he managed to dispense with. Anne became Queen of France. They then set about attempting to produce an heir, but none of their 4 children survived. Meanwhile, Louis d'Orléans was still married to the childless Joan. Then Charles went and knocked himself in the head on that fatal lintel in Amboise and died, leaving Anne as his widow and dowager consort and dowager queen. Without a male heir, d'Orléans was next up in the batter's box. There had been some kind of agreement that if Charles died without heir, his widow, that would have been Anne of Brittany, would be married off to the next king. Louis XII turned out to be that man, but first he had to get rid of Joan. The divorce was contentious and apparently quite ugly, with claims and counterclaims expressed in open hearings about whether or not the two had actually done the deed. In the end, Louis prevailed, and Joan, shown here dressed first as Queen of France and afterwards as a nun, was shuffled off to a nunnery. Unshackled from the infertile Joan, Louis married the reluctant dowager queen in 1499. She was still only 22 years old. She seemed a likely prospect for live births, and even better for sons. She was queen under Louis for about 15 years. The best guess is that she managed another 7 pregnancies during those years, with just 3 surviving children, one a son, Charles, who was born in 1500 but who died shortly after birth, and 2 surviving daughters, Claude and Renée. You'll recall that Louis's father had been 70 when Louis was born, and perhaps Louis thought he could manage the same hat trick. Unfortunately, Anne died in 1514 at the age of 36. She passed away at the Château of Blois, which was Louis's ancestral home. The exact cause of her death was never recorded, but it is speculated she died from complications related to yet another miscarriage or from chronic illness. Whether or not and how much Louis mourned the loss of Anne we'll never know, but he was respectful of her memory. The tomb of Louis XII and Anne of Brittany is located in the Basilica of Saint-Denis in Paris. It was commissioned by Louis himself. The tomb was designed by an architect named Pierre Lescaut and was completed in the early 16th century. The tomb features elaborate sculptures and is a significant example of Renaissance art in France. It includes effigies of both Louis XII and Anne, depicted in recumbent position and at prayer, and has various decorative elements. The tomb is lovely and quite the tourist destination for anyone who's willing to venture a bit north of Paris. But while Anne's body may have been buried in Paris, her heart, in the end, was returned to Nantes. Death didn't put an end to Anne's travels throughout the Kingdom of France. While Anne's body may have been buried in Paris, her heart, in the end, was returned to her beloved Brittany and rests inside the tomb of her father, Duke Francis of Brittany, and her mother, Margaret of Foix. This practice of burying the heart separately from the body was pretty common among the nobility, and in Anne's case, it reflects her strong ties to her family and her homeland of Brittany. The reliquary shown here is a beautifully crafted artifact that reflects her piety and artistic styles of the late Gothic and early Renaissance period. It may once have contained her heart, but her heart ultimately was buried in the cathedral. Thank you for joining me today. Come back next time to explore Anne's ancestral home, the chateau of the Dukes of Brittany, and the town of Nantes which surrounds it, with me, the Armchair Traveler, as your guide.